Tonight on Bridge City News, the Alberta government has struck a committee to look into our province's high automobile insurance rates. The federal carbon tax is set to begin next month in Alberta. Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel-Garner gives us her thoughts on the tax. And the number of opioid overdoses are going down in Standoff thanks to an effective treatment method.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Today is a historic day in the United States. Democrats and Republicans are voting on whether or not to impeach U.S. President Donald Trump. He faces charges of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. It centers on whether or not he improperly sought help from Ukraine to boost his chances of re-election in 2020. Members of both sides of the House floor debated as the vote draws near.
Now here, the Democrats have been bent to impeach the President of the United States before the court decides this. And this means that there's a rush job to do this. And why is there? Because they want to influence the 2020 elections.
Our founders, Mr. Speaker, entrusted us with the awesome responsibility of protecting our democracy, which gets its power not from the bloodlines of monarchs, but from the votes of we the people. Without that, we are no longer a democracy, we are a monarchy or a dictatorship.
The last U.S. president to be impeached was Bill Clinton in 1998, who was charged with perjury. He was not removed by the Senate as president, and many political experts believe that Trump, should he be impeached, will not be removed either. A new partnership between the Blackfoot Confederacy, the University of Lethbridge, and the MasterCard Foundation to tackle education barriers and to create new job opportunities for Blackfoot youth was announced earlier today in Brockett. As Loris Alexander explains, it's an initiative that will see $15 million being invested over the next 5 years.
I think the key pillars are, when they were mentioned, education and employment, economic development pathways. I think, part of me just sort of jumped up with excitement.
The initiative will create new opportunities for Indigenous, primarily Blackfoot youth, to access education and supports for employment and economic inclusion.
We're going to, number one, provide an opportunity for our young people. But I think number two, I think it provides that format and that forum that we're able to partner with an organization like MasterCard Foundation.
The initiative will also support the U of L in its commitment to reconciliation.
I think the open door policy with the University of Lethbridge will probably get our young people to get that mindset about post-secondary.
The university has always supported me in anything I wanted to do. So I want to support the university in anything they want to do. And also, just for them having the Native American Studies program available for me, that's what helped me get through university. Because there's that place that I could have an identity and a place that I could grow. And that's what I'm hoping for the future people, is to have that more relationship, more open relationship.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The opioid crisis rages in many communities across Alberta, some of those making huge strides in breaking the cycle of addiction, including the Spirit Home Detox Centre in Standoff. While the facility only has provincial funding for 6 beds, the Detox Centre takes care of 20 to 25 patients at a time. The group's director, Jason Abry, says in November of 2018, they had 58 overdoses to deal with, but last month, that number dropped significantly to just 15. This month, only 5 overdoses. Last year on this time, there were 30. Abry says they've helped others outside of the Blood Tribe to detox, including those from Treaty 6 and Treaty 8. New treatment strategies are taking place south of the border when it comes to battling the opioid epidemic. One is an approach that begins with access to medicine that prevents withdrawal sickness. As we hear in this next report, early research suggests the approach is changing lives.
Jamie Klein likes to keep busy at work.
Need them enlarged.
She's grateful to have a job.
You wouldn't have even recognized me a year ago.
For more than a decade, Klein was addicted to heroin and other drugs. Like so many others caught up in the opioid crisis, her addiction began with painkillers prescribed after a car accident. She became homeless and cycled in and out of jail.
You give up hope. You don't feel like you're ever gonna, get back on your feet.
During her last stint in jail, Klein took a medication called buprenorphine.
It gives people a chance, to get back on track and let their brains heal.
Klein's turnaround is a success story for an emerging philosophy for opioid addiction called medication first.
Hey, long time no see.
Proponents say it's important to prescribe buprenorphine rapidly, without any initial counseling or even a commitment to recovery.
When somebody is ready to give up heroin, it's usually kind of like an impulse decision or something that they've made a decision and they are ready for action at that point. And so waiting for 2 or 3 weeks to get in or a few months is just not a practical matter.
People file in to take medication every night at the Olympia Bupe Clinic in Washington State. Like heroin and other painkillers, buprenorphine is an opioid, but it doesn't fully turn on the body's opioid receptors that drive addiction, helping stabilize the cravings.
Well, first, just to say the research is clear and convincing that the medication buprenorphine works, and that the longer people are on it, the better, and that it cuts your chance of dying by about 50%.
But skeptics say medication should be used alongside counseling, 12-step programs, and other support services.
There's a pill that you can take to alleviate the high, to alleviate the withdrawal, to maybe alleviate certain symptoms, but it doesn't cure the disease.
Clinics using buprenorphine are scattered throughout the country. Washington State already has nearly a dozen.
We are not going to meaningfully bend down this overdose death curve that right now is continuing to increase until we treat the vast majority of people with medications.
Klein takes her pills twice a day. In addition to working again, she's been able to reconnect with her family.
I feel like being a recovering addict, you have a lot to prove. I worked my butt off. I worked very hard.
A payoff that seemed out of reach only a year ago. Noreen Nasser, Associated Press.
Lethbridge police are continuing their investigation into the disappearance of 26-year-old Marshall Iwasa. He was last seen by his family in Lethbridge on November 17th. He told his family that he was driving to Calgary but never arrived. A week later, RCMP in Pemberton, British Columbia reported they found his burnt-out vehicle. Police are asking for help to try and get more leads.
Anybody who has a business, service station, convenience store along the road from Lethbridge to Pemberton, we're certainly asking to review their closed circuit TV surveillance cameras. Obviously, we recognize that a lot of these systems do overwrite after a period of time, so timing is important, and we certainly encourage those businesses to do that for us. And if they come across anything that they think is important or meeting the description of the vehicle or somebody that may be a similar description to Mr. Iwasa, to contact police. 3
men have been charged following a bike chop shop raid in North Lethbridge. Police found stolen bikes valued at over $5,500 and tools at around $6,000. During a search of the home located on 20th Street North, police also seized both fentanyl and methamphetamine. 53-year-old Bradley Smith, 45-year-old Ken Leverington, and 39-year-old Theodore McComb face various charges including possession of stolen property and drug trafficking. An arrest warrant has been issued for a man in connection with the abduction of 3 children in Fox Creek. 23-year-old D'Artagnan Dirkpool of Lethbridge did not show up for his court appearance, and neither did a lawyer on his behalf. His lawyer had applied to be removed as the counsel of record, with the request being granted. Poole and Charmaine Darnell of Whitecourt were charged after 3 kids aged 3, 4, and 9 months were abducted on June 1st in Fox Creek. An Amber Alert was issued, and 2 hours later, the children and their mom were found in a vehicle near Sylvan Lake. The children were not hurt. Poole is facing 3 counts of abduction. Darnell has already pleaded guilty to 4 charges and is back in court on December 23rd. A person was sent to hospital following a collision between a train and an SUV near Tabor last night. EMS were called out to the intersection of Highway 3 and Range Road 16-1 around 8 p.m. When firefighters arrived, they saw that the SUV had caught on fire. The driver of the SUV was taken to hospital. No train cars were derailed and no hazards were present on the roadway. Christmas is exactly 1 week from today. It's hard to believe, isn't it? We're reminded this time of year of potential fire hazards in and around our homes. Troy Hicks, fire prevention officer with the City of Lethbridge, says electrical fires are especially common around Christmas time.
Electrical fires are huge. We do have a lot of them here in the city throughout the year. When you're using Christmas decorations outside, make sure you're using outdoor cords. Make sure you're not overloading your outlets outside, and just keep it safe. For using any lights or electrical devices inside, power bars are the safest thing to use. Once again, they don't allow you to overload the circuit for create that heat. So use a power bar, make sure you're checking your electrical devices, your lights. If the wires are getting frayed or the plastic sheathing is getting broken, replace them.
Hicks also discussed the importance of a fire extinguisher for your home and the proper way of using one.
Most extinguishers you're going to buy, you're going to want an ABC extinguisher. Now that is a fire extinguisher that will put out any ordinary combustibles, any flammable liquids, or any electrical fire. Very easy to use. If you have one at home, have a look at it. You want to make sure if you have a pressure gauge, it is in the green, not above or below. In the green means it's ready to go and it should be good to go. You want to make sure you have a seal and a pin. That will keep it all safe. To actually use the extinguisher, you want to be 8 feet away from what is burning. If at a distance of 8 feet, you can really feel the heat in your face or taste that soot in your mouth, the fire's too big. Even with an extinguisher, you need to evacuate. Call 911 to get the fire department there as quick as you can. But if at that distance you feel safe to do so, it's very easy to use. You want to use the acronym PASS, P-A-S-S. The P is very simple. You want to pull the pin. Just give it a twist. The seal breaks very easy. The A is you want to aim. And where you aim is the base of the fire. That is what's burning. That's where you want to start. Your first S is you want to squeeze the handle. And your second S is you want to sweep from side to side.
Stats Canada says there are around 24,000 house fires annually in our country, resulting in 377 deaths and more than 3,000 injuries each year. The provincial government has launched a new advisory committee to look into reforming Alberta's auto insurance system. The 3-person committee will include a consumer representative along with a legal and medical expert. It will provide recommendations to the government on how to stabilize and reduce the cost of automobile insurance. The committee will also look into ensuring injured Albertans are still protected with the proper treatment and compensation in recovery. Minister of Finance Travis Taves said in a press release earlier today, "We know the auto insurance industry in our province is no longer meeting Albertans' needs. We pay some of the highest rates in our country. The government is committed to addressing this problem and making necessary changes to automobile insurance." The committee will be chaired by Chris Daniel, who is in his second term as the consumer representative on the Automobile Insurance Board. When January 1st rolls around, we'll not only be shouting Happy New Year, but we'll be paying a new federal carbon tax. The Trudeau federal Liberals made the announcement that Alberta will be paying the tax federally after the UCP government repealed the provincial carbon tax. Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says the carbon tax is nothing more than a tax grab.
But we know that a carbon tax is not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. It's a cash grab. And you're right to say that this is about everyday Albertans and Canadians and their, like how much we're paying. And I think that this is bad public policy that the Liberals shouldn't be allowed to run roughshod with.
MP Rempel-Garner will have more on what impact Ottawa's federal carbon tax will have on Albertans. That's coming up in the second half of our show. The federal government is going to be decreasing the carbon tax rebates for 3 provinces that have not adopted carbon pricing models that meet federal requirements. The Trudeau Liberals added Alberta to the mix after the UCP repealed the previous government's consumer carbon tax. The biggest drop in rebate will be in Saskatchewan, where a family of 4 will qualify for rebates totaling $809. That's a drop from $903 that was projected this year. A family of 4 in Alberta will see a rebate of $888 next year. In Manitoba, the rebate goes from $499 to $486, and in Ontario, the rebate will be $3 lower to $448. Public high school teachers in Ontario are back on the picket lines for the 3rd time in as many weeks. The teachers are trying to pressure the government during contract talks. The one-day strike affects 10 boards across the province, closing high schools in many areas, including Thunder Bay and Waterloo. The union says it is asking the government to reverse increase to class sizes and mandatory e-learning requirements. The government says compensation is the main issue as it tries to cap public sector salary increases at 1%. Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau spoke about his recent meeting with his provincial and territorial counterparts about calls for changes to the Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Morneau says Ottawa will review the requests and come back with a response next month.
We had a very robust discussion on the Fiscal Stabilization Program. And in that discussion, we heard from the provinces. The province of Saskatchewan brought forward a proposal on how we could move forward with fiscal stabilization reform. That is something that was discussed. And I committed to asking my officials to begin an analysis and to getting back in January with not only a sense of the timeline that we can move forward for those discussions, but also a sense of the process that we can move forward that would enable this discussion and some potential changes to happen in the near term.
Finance Minister Morneau also said he believes the global economy is on solid financial footing, as is the Canadian economy. Now, that's according to one of our regular political contributors, journalist Brian Lilly. Mr. Lilly says Morneau may not see the warning signs that the global economy is actually slowing down.
In his fiscal update, Bill Morneau said the economy of Canada as a whole is strong, the economy is growing. Well, if that's the case, why do you still need to do stimulus spending? The theory is governments do stimulus spending in bad times, they save up in good times so that they have money for the bad times. These guys are just doing stimulus spending all the time. As for the future of the Canadian economy being strong, there's a lot of warning signs, including the International Monetary Fund, setting the global economy is going to slow. In particular, the United States and China, those are our two biggest trading partners. That's something we have to be concerned about.
Catch the full interview with Brian Lilly and BCN's Paul Arthur, talking more about the economy and names being bantered about who's going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. That's coming up after business news. We had another mild day in this city, and the mercury will be climbing even further later in the week. Complete weather details are coming up. Not a bad day in the Windy City. We had more gusty Chinook winds, but fairly mild. Tonight, more winds up to 50 kilometers an hour with a low near -2. Clearing tomorrow with more wind up to 60 kilometers an hour and a high near 5. Friday, the clouds should clear and we should see a high near 11. A beautiful Saturday shaping up, blue sky, sunshine, and a high near 12 degrees. Cooling off Sunday with a high of only 4. Monday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 0. Tuesday, the mercury will dip slightly to -1. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 0 and an average low of -12. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1954 at 14 degrees, and the record low, a chilly -34 in 1955. Sunrise was at 8:24, sunset at 4:32. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect rain and a high of 8 degrees in Victoria. Showers at 8 as well for Vancouver. Clearing at 3 degrees is on tap for Calgary on Thursday. Mainly cloudy and -2 for Edmonton. Regina will be mainly cloudy and -6. Expect an overcast day and -6 as well for Saskatoon. A mixture of sun and cloud and -12 degrees for Winnipeg tomorrow. A chance of flurries and a high of only -9 for Toronto. It'll be partly cloudy and -15 in Ottawa. Mainly sunny and -12 for Montreal. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of -10. A 30% chance of flurries and a high near -7 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Snow and -8 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly cloudy day tomorrow and a high near -4. SNC-Lavalin shares were halted earlier today, shortly before the engineering giant pleaded guilty to fraud charges. Today's development follows Sunday's conviction of former top executive Sami Bebawi on charges of fraud and corruption in Libya about 20 years ago. SNC-Lavalin and 2 of its subsidiaries were accused of paying nearly $48 million to public officials to influence government decisions under the late dictator Muammar Gaddafi's regime. The company will pay $280 million penalty.
$200 million of fine is an amount of fine that has been rarely given in Canadian history. I challenge everyone to find a fine that is higher than that for a criminal offense by a company. Secondly, so in that sense, the fine does reflect the severity of the crime and does reflect the gravity of the offense that was committed.
Higher gasoline prices led to an increase in inflation last month. Stats Canada says the consumer price index rose 2.2% compared to a year ago. The jump ends a 3-month streak where the annual pace of inflation held steady at 1.9%. Gas prices were up almost 1% compared to a drop of 6.7% in October. The agency says it is the first year-over-year increase in the cost of gas since October of last year. Canadians paid more for meat in November, with prices up 5.2% compared with a year ago. Beginning next month, Boeing says it will temporarily stop making its grounded 737 MAX jets. The company is struggling to get approval from regulators to put the plane back in the air.
I think halting production is a pretty major downside, that it disrupts the whole supply chain. It puts labor in a terrible spot. It causes a real loss of the economies of scale that this airplane has. You keep that assembly line going because of all the efficiencies. You know, on the other hand, producing these planes and not halting, you're going to have a lot of planes sitting on the ground, depreciating, needing to be paid for. The airlines certainly aren't going to pay for planes until they're ready for flight. So Boeing is really between a rock and a hard place here. And Boeing will be the first to acknowledge that major mistakes were made, both on their part and the part of FAA regulators, not being completely forthcoming about the problems.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 43 points on the day to 17,031. The Dow was down almost 28 points to 28,239. The S&P 500 was down a single point to 3191, and the Nasdaq was up 4 points to 8827. Oil was down 5 cents on the day to $60.89 per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to $2.29. Gold was down 7 cents to $14.7534 an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $17.02 an ounce. Wheat is at $235 per metric ton, barley's at $237, canola's at $4.56, and corn is at $274 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 3 cents to $122.65. Feeder cattle were down 60 cents to $145.50. Lean hogs were up 5 cents on the day to $70.40. And the Canadian dollar was unchanged on the day at 76.24 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a new partnership between the Blackfoot Confederacy, the U of L, and MasterCard Foundation to tackle education barriers and to create new job opportunities for Blackfoot youth was announced earlier today in Brockett. The initiative would see $15 million being invested over the next 5 years. Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner is not happy with the federal Liberals' carbon tax, which is set to kick in next month. She shares her thoughts next with BCN's Paul Arthur. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come to the Shakespeare Meets Dickens Christmas celebration with a Tudor Victorian flair. This event is taking place on Friday, December 20th at 7 p.m. in the ATB Community Room at CASA. Enjoy a performance of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, followed by scenes and songs from Shakespeare. Plus, join in the merriment and sing along to your favorite Christmas carols. Traditional treats include mince pies, gingerbread, eggnog, and mulled wine. Tickets are $20 and can be purchased at CASA. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The Evangelical Free Church of Lethbridge invites everyone to come for a free community Christmas experience for the whole family. Enjoy Christmas goodies, activities for the kids, carol singing, and a Christmas message to infuse your season with joy. Multiple dates and times are available to take in this festive, family-friendly event. Visit efreelethbridge.ca/Christmas for more information. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is holding their 35th annual Christmas Turkey Dinner on December 25th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the LSCO. Everyone from the community is invited to attend. Donations for the dinner are greatly appreciated. For more information, call 403-320-2222. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Well, the federal Liberals have presented the throne speech and are set to make some changes in 2020 with a minority government. Joining me now is Michelle Rempel-Garner. She is the federal Conservative MP in the Calgary Nose Hill riding. Good to have you with us, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Michelle, you were not overly impressed with this Liberal plan here. In fact, you called it an insult to your constituents. And Finance Minister Bill Morneau also giving us the fiscal update this week. So some more red ink coming our way as well. What do you think?
Well, for those watching, the throne speech, practically what it means is it's the government, Justin Trudeau's government, laying out its vision for the country for the foreseeable future. And I think what really frustrated me was, given the sense of anger and frustration that Albertans are rightly feeling right now with regard to our economy and some of the legislation that have come forward from Ottawa, to not have a mention in the throne speech in any sort of material way, it was infuriating, frankly. And that's what I heard from many people across Alberta who've written into my office since then. So I think it's right to scrutinize. And then to your point as well, today we find out that the government under Trudeau has incurred a significant unexpected deficit. And there's also rumors today that they are going to be increasing the carbon tax. So,
wow.
This type of, this type of deficit spending without our community seeing anything that's making their life better, and an increase in tax, no mention for Alberta in the vision for our country. This is only going to make things worse here, and we're going to have to really fight against it.
Okay. Yeah, in Alberta, we were not big fans of the of this news for sure. So now the Liberals have said they're open to tweaking how Bill C-69, Bill C-48 are implemented. Now, do you believe that? I mean, and again, I mean, do these bills need tweaking, or do they need something more along the lines of a complete overhaul?
I guess I'm just tired of Alberta sort of being on the, back end of, tweaks, or like this is somehow a big concession or something great for Alberta. I've watched, for example, the Bloc Québécois leader, Mr. Blanchette, stand up in the House in the last week and just get the rapt attention of the federal Liberals, because they know that they have to negotiate with Quebec for a path to majority for them. Why doesn't Alberta get that same level of attention? And the reality is that C-69, C-48, it's not about tweaking. They're two bills that fundamentally destabilize the investment climate in Alberta. And I don't understand why we're being subject to that, or that's, somehow talking about tweaking, is that a good thing or not? They should just not be there. And I think, frankly, we've come to a time in our country where political leaders from Alberta have to start marking lines in the sand on what's acceptable for our province and what isn't. And that's where I'm at on this. They both need to go. They should not be here. They're destructive to our confederation, and that's my opinion on this. Okay.
Well, now the Liberals have given a green light to Alberta's industrial carbon tax for heavy emitters, but that, again, January 1st, Albertans, everyday people, are going to be again paying a federal carbon tax on fuel for our cars, natural gas to heat our homes. A lot of economists saying in order to meet the government's 2030 targets, the carbon tax would have to quadruple. So, where do you see this going?
Well, again, today we're hearing news out of Ottawa from Environment Minister Wilkinson that they are indeed looking at hiking the carbon tax. This is, before the carbon tax has even been completely implemented in Canada. And, I find it coincidental that hike in a consumption tax, the carbon tax essentially functions like a GST or a PST. That's happening on the same day when we find out that they've got massive unprojected, unbudgeted expenditures coming out of Ottawa. Look, we have to care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we know that a carbon tax is not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. It's a cash grab. And you're right to say that this is about everyday Albertans and Canadians and their, how much we're paying. And I think that this is bad public policy that the Liberals shouldn't be allowed to run roughshod with.
Well, we'll see where it goes, yeah. Now, the government is promising to strengthen the middle class, and we're just talking about the middle class here, I guess, right? Finance Minister Bill Morneau announcing a tax cut to save the average Canadian family. I think it's around $585 a year. So, I guess the numbers would be similar to what the Conservatives were promising. So, are they headed in the right direction on this particular area?
Well, first of all, they can't even define what the middle class is, right? And for me, the reality is there's a lot of people in my province, my community, in our country that are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're living in situations with precarious unemployment. So for me, the question, the tax cut that they're talking about is cold comfort when we hear that they're going to be increasing the carbon tax and that they're really not going to be doing anything to restore the economy in many parts of the country. And I think that's where a lot of Canadians are concerned. When you start talking about precarious employment, loss of jobs permanently, the energy sector especially, I think that's where there's a loss of trust in the government, just on fiscal management writ large. So I guess bottom line, you can't increase tax on everything through the carbon tax and then expect Canadians to get excited about a small shift somewhere else, especially when we're seeing a loss of economic opportunity.
Sure. How about affordable housing? That's an issue, of course, in certain cities. Yeah.
I think the question is around affordable housing is different in different regions of the country, right? If somebody is watching this in Vancouver, the reasons for a lack of affordable housing are far different than they would be in, let's say, Toronto or other parts of the country. So we need to have a national strategy that addresses problems that are different in each part of the country. But also, I mean, this goes back to what we were just talking about. People can't afford to pay rent or to buy a house if there's no prospect for long-term employment for them in the country. And I think we're kind of at the point where many people are saying, well, look, if I don't work for the government, I don't really see job stability in Canada. And that is a very bad sign for our economy writ large. Certainly the government has a role to play in providing and ensuring access to affordable housing, but that ties into so many other policy areas: the economy, immigration policy, government spending writ large. And we just haven't seen a lot of sustainable action from the federal government. And I do think my party, the Conservative Party, has a role to play in that conversation, and we will be doing that as we go forward.
And there's been talk about, too, maybe having some provinces like Alberta, do we need to have the same mortgage stress test as they do in Vancouver?
Absolutely. And some of my colleagues who have been arguing about this for, saying no to that principle for a long time on the Conservative benches, we did hear that the government is considering looking at the stress test and making some of those changes, but we have to pressure them in a minority parliament situation to do that. You're spot on, and that's a very important policy that has affected home ownership for many Canadians.
Right. Here's another one that Albertans, I have friends who are gun owners. Here's a Liberal plan to fight crime. Now, this includes, banning military-style assault rifles and buying them back from the legal owners at a cost of, I think, around $600 million. And considering the research says most guns used in crimes are smuggled in from the U.S., is this money well spent?
Well, first of all, I think we all can agree and have to agree that preventing firearms violence is a very important thing in Canada. I certainly believe that. And that's where you have to start looking at what is the best public policy instrument to do that. What's the best way to do that? In Canada, the data shows that firearms that are used in violent crime, a vast majority, I believe it's over 95%, are actually smuggled in from the United States. They're illegally obtained. So the money that they would use to buy back property sort of on an ad hoc basis, when we have such a very strict licensing regime in Canada that's so much more strict than the United States. I am a firearms owner myself. It's an exercise in politics as opposed to an exercise in humanity. If we want to address violent crime, firearms used in violent crime, then that money, think about what $500 million could do to augment the RCMP's presence, let's say, or have better detection and penalties for those firearms that are being illegally imported from the U.S. I think that this is a debate that has been purposely put in place by the Liberal government to wedge and inflame and sort of make firearms owners the bad guy, as opposed to putting a spotlight on their lack of ability to address this issue through the policy that we actually need to make a difference. And certainly that's something that I strongly oppose. And I think that many Canadians, when they understand at the heart of this is a care for our community and a desire to reduce firearms violence to zero, I think people will come on board. And some of the terminology that's being used, firearms that they're talking about banning right now that have come out this week, they're hunting rifles. They're tools that are used by hunters, by farmers. This is ridiculous. And you can certainly expect to hear more from me and our party on this.
Yeah, for sure. How do we define what an assault rifle is? There's a 5-round limit in any magazine you put into a gun in Canada, at least for rifles. And of course, normally we think of this long, AK-47, 50 shots in the rounds, or in one of these magazines. That's not the case here. That's not legal in Canada at this point already. So I'm not sure how much good this will do.
I was just going to say very quickly, the other point being that, in Canada, you can't just go and buy a firearm. There's an extensive vetting process. It's not like the United States. Anybody who owns a handgun or, these types of rifles is heavily vetted, you can only take it to certain places. So it's not the same. And it's something that we have to get this debate back to pragmatic policy and care for our community.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of emotion that comes into these gun debates, and we stray from the facts fairly quickly, it seems. Now, there's going to be a lot of pressure from the NDP on the government to implement a national pharmacare plan. So, do you think that's doable? And would it be cost-effective, right?
Well, I think we have to understand who's being served and by this plan and what the gaps are in policy right now. I think that that's step number one. When people talk about pharmacare, we have to understand who isn't being served right now in this country, and I know that there's some debate on that. Obviously, affordable access to medicine is something we all want to achieve, but when people are talking about this, like certainly the NDP, the Liberals, they haven't put any detail around that. And I could look at this camera and I could say, yep, we're going to do something without a plan. That's not responsible, especially when we've seen, the government be $7 billion over budget in 1 year. I think that we have to, first of all, the pragmatic approach is to say who is being underserviced in Canada by our current programs that exist to have access to medication to people. How do we best service them and how do we pay for it? And I think that will be our party's approach going forward, not ignoring the fact that we want to make sure people are healthy, but also making sure that we're targeting the right people, those that are most in need, and that we have a plan to pay for it.
Yeah, it's important. Nothing comes for free, right? So, hey, before we close here, I do want to touch base, of course, on the in-house divisiveness that seems to be there in the Federal Conservative Party at this point. Andrew Scheer just resigning. He wants to spend some more time with his family. So, there's some infighting here, of course, saying, well, this has to do with, paying the difference between what it costs to send Scheer's children to a private school in Ottawa compared to the cost in Regina. Was it okayed by, the Conservative Fund, or wasn't it? Dustin Van Voot gets fired. Wow, it's a bit of a, airing of dirty laundry that doesn't, look good on the Conservative Party.
Having this conversation, the people I think about first and foremost are the people who just very recently elected me with a 70% mandate to go to Ottawa. It's people in my community. And what they want to see is stability and holding the Trudeau government to account at a time of, I think global instability and at a time when we've got some serious problems at home. This week, in the middle of all of this, we were discussing the NAFTA renegotiated agreement, very serious policy. So to those people, I want to say this. That is our first concern as a party, and we are bringing stability and holding Trudeau to account, even in the midst of all of that. The second thing I want to say is I think it is very healthy and long overdue that my party has a conversation about who we are as a party, how we best serve Canadians, and put together a bold vision. The path that we are going down right now as a country, I do not think is the best path for everybody who lives here under this government, the current government. But it is also our responsibility as the Conservative Party to tell people what they are voting for and how we would change. And I think it's healthy to have a leadership race after an election. I think it's healthy to talk about ideas, how we govern funds. And, now I find myself in a position, I've been around the party for a while, and I intend to use that level of seniority to force those discussions. And I encourage anyone who's watching this who, either has a membership in the party or has voted Conservative in the past to be an active participant in this. People get the political parties in Canada that they ask for. And I hope anyone who would consider voting Conservative raises their voice and makes their voices heard on this. In the meantime, myself and my colleagues will continue to hold this government to account and do stuff that's in the best interest of our community. Okay, and before I let you go, there's been some rumblings that you may throw your hat into the ring here for the leadership race. Have you made a decision on that yet? Look, this is it's pretty 48 early, hours. It's early. And to be honest with you, where my heart is at right now is getting the conversation right, the parameters for the leadership race, and also ensuring that the Canadian public understands that we're working for them in Ottawa in the middle of all of this. So sure, that's a lot of weight to place on my shoulders and others in my party. But I'm more concerned about right now making sure that we get the parameters for that discussion right and that Canadians feel like they can participate in it. So stay tuned. I'm sure that there'll be many people making many announcements, but we have to, anybody who's making this decision has to understand why they're doing that. And I think it's irresponsible to do that in a 48-hour period. So. Okay. Thanks so much for your time today, Michelle. Thanks, guys. Hey,
It's been a busy week in Ottawa, including our finance minister throwing out some new fiscal updates for us. Where are we headed in Canada, right? So we are joined today by one of our regular BCN contributors, Brian Lilly. Good to have you on again, Brian. Finance Minister Bill Morneau, he's apparently open to a change in the Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Tell us about that.
Oh, this is the fund that, if you remember the Premier's meeting that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, they all came together in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, and it was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's attempt to bring everyone together in cool jets. You know, we had a lot of talk of Western alienation. We had the Bloc in Quebec. We had people angry at each other, and Ford said, hey, why don't we have a family meeting? And the Western premiers in particular, but also Newfoundland and Labrador, because they're an oil province as well, they said, you know what? We need a fix to this Fiscal Stabilization Fund. It's not equalization. It's a different fund, and it's supposed to be there. It's supposed to be for when you have a sudden drop in, government revenues. It's supposed to be more nimble than equalization. And they all got together in the room, and every premier said, yep, we're going to back this. They couldn't get an agreement on changing equalization, which I know both Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe would like, but they all said this is the right thing to do. We hadn't really heard from the feds on this, and then Bill Morneau on Monday does his fiscal update and says, you know what, I'm willing to talk about this. This could be upwards more than $2 billion for the province of Alberta if they get everything they want. I don't know that they will. I think the number is about $2.8 billion is what they want. We're probably looking at below 2, but more than 1 is my guess of what the feds will offer. But they will offer something. Is my the fact that they're even talking publicly about being open to this has to be a good sign. They just haven't committed yet. They're dating, but they haven't agreed to get married yet to the issue.
Well, that's very good news if they follow through on that. Any timeline on that, ballpark, as to when they'll maybe make a decision on where to go with that?
I would suspect that we're looking at the budget, which is somewhere between the very end of February and the early weeks of April. That's the normal time frame for a budget. I don't remember one before Valentine's Day, and I don't remember one falling too far beyond, maybe 1 or 2 that went past middle of April. So we've got about a 5 to 6 week window just around the end of winter where you can expect that they will bring forward the federal budget. My guess is there's going to be a nugget in there that says, here's what you're getting, here's what we can afford, and here's how we'll do it.
Okay, well, we'll take what we can get, right? In Alberta, we need it. Morneau also releasing his fall fiscal update, as you mentioned. Now, he did this outside of Parliament, which is perhaps a mild controversy, but the main issue here, where are the deficits heading?
Yeah, and the reason it's, that's a mild controversy is that you normally update the House of Commons on the fiscal situation of the country when they're sitting, but the MPs all went home last week. They went back to the House of Commons. I don't want to say they went back to work for a week and a half. They were back in the Commons for a week and a half. They're still working, most of them. But you don't see this often. Budgets and fiscal updates are done when the legislature is sitting. Ontario did this outside a budget outside of the provincial parliament once. They went to an auto parts plant and released the budget. And that was a huge controversy. It hurt the government. I don't think this will to the same degree, but it shouldn't be something that you want to emulate. Bottom line is deficits are going up, but we knew that because the Liberals said, forget about that promise we made in the last election of 3 small deficits of $10 billion. They'd already punted that well down. And they've gone to deficits of $30 billion a year. Well, after the deficit's going down, we're heading back up towards the 25, 27, 30 billion for the next few years. When will the deficit spending end? Don't ask. Some financial department figures say that we're looking at about 2050, which is a bit crazy because in his fiscal update, Bill Morneau said the economy of Canada as a whole is strong. The economy is growing. Well, if that's the case, why do you still need to do stimulus spending? The theory is governments do stimulus spending in bad times. They save up in good times so that they have money for the bad times. These guys are just doing stimulus spending all the time. As for the future of the Canadian economy being strong, there's a lot of warning signs, including the International Monetary Fund, setting the global economy is going to slow, in particular The United States and China, those are our two biggest trading partners. That's something we have to be concerned about.
Absolutely. I'm glad Morneau's not doing my finances. Wow. Okay. Now, Brian, you had a chance to speak with Premier Doug Ford, actually, today. So can you give us any inside stuff here? I know he's got a lot on his plate here, in particular guns and gangs. That's been an issue in Toronto. Has he said anything on where that's going?
Well, you know, he's still feeling pretty good about that meeting that we talked about, where he brought all the premiers together, and he was quite pleased to talk about that. But the most interesting part, and what I've been writing about in the Toronto Sun, is this his response on guns and gangs, because we were asking him specifically about the city of Toronto. But of course, this is a problem in Ottawa. This is a problem in smaller cities like Thunder Bay. This is a problem in cities across the country. What do you do with guns and gangs? And of course, the Liberal response is they have just said in the mandate letter to Public Safety Minister Bill Blair, we're going to bring in a handgun ban through the provinces to allow cities to ban handguns, and we're going to take away what are called military-style assault rifles. Of course, they haven't defined what that is, and there's some very popular rifles there. They're talking about buying back 250,000 rifles at a cost of $600 million. So I said to Doug Ford, they're going to spend twice as much on buying back guns from licensed legal gun owners as they will on fighting guns and gangs. You know, it's $300 million over 5 years. I said, what could you do to fight guns and gangs with that $600 million? And he talked about a whole myriad of things, from job training to better policing to beefing up the court system so that the revolving door of bail doesn't continue. And then he started talking about affordable housing, and I found that really interesting. It's not what you'd expect from the public image of Doug Ford, the stereotype of Doug Ford. But he said, look, we need to give people better economic opportunities so that they're not getting into gangs. And I could do a lot better things with this money than buy back guns from legal gun owners. Ford, along with Kenny, I'm trying to remember all the premiers I talked to, but it was definitely Ford, Kenny, and Moe, all said they won't be participating in any federal attempt at a handgun ban for municipalities. They're just not going to participate because they say that's not the issue. The handguns being used in crime are the ones smuggled in from across the border. Exactly. It's a little bit like, saying to doctors, we have an opioid problem, so we're going to take away your drugs from the doctors. You know, really? I mean, the good guys, aren't going around shooting people, so it's not going to be. And the ones that are, you deal with in the courts. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a waste, to me anyway, a waste of money. I'm speaking, I guess, on behalf of gun owners everywhere. All right. Now, Brian, we spent a lot of time speaking about the SNC Lavalin scandal over the last year, and news this week that one of the backroom players in that scandal is not being demoted, like you'd think, but in fact promoted to a big job in Bill Morneau's office. So tell us about that. Yeah, this comes on the heels of a former SNC Lavalin executive being convicted of bribery and corruption charges. Strangely enough, and Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Attorney General that stepped out of cabinet over this whole scandal, tweeted out stories about that over the weekend. I found that interesting. But the fellow that was in Justin Trudeau's office that was putting the pressure on Jody Wilson-Raybould to give that deal, one of them is a guy named Elder Marquez. And you might think that with all the trouble he caused the government, they might say, you know what, great job, thank you very much, but you caused us a lot of headaches. Here's a parting gift, rice-a-roni, the San Francisco treat, pick it up on your way out the door. No, he's getting a promotion. He's going to become the chief of staff to the Minister of Finance, the second most powerful cabinet minister in the federal government. And he, as chief of staff, he's effectively running the whole office. So this is not a demotion of any sort. This is a promotion. Well, it sends a signal. Perhaps they're thinking we didn't do anything wrong as the Liberal Party as a whole. I mean, what else can you say about that, right? It does send a message. On the other side, the flip side, the Conservative Party, they have their issues too here. Kind of a weird tendency to eat their own, right? Let's see. Let's recap this last week here. Fire the party's executive director. Maybe blame Scheer's leaving on school fees being paid with party donations, and make it look really bad for Andrew that he was doing something devious here.
it just doesn't hit me the right way here. Man, do we really? I mean, this is not uncommon, is it? For again, to be paying the difference between what it would cost to send your kid to a Catholic private school in Regina compared to what it's costs in Ottawa.
Yeah, look, that's up for the Conservative Party to decide if that's the right thing. But the idea that party leaders get top-ups or they get certain things that they want paid for by the party, which means donations from members, is not crazy. One of the people on the board of the Conservative Party of Canada Fund that is said to be incensed by this is a guy named Stephen Joseph Harper, former Prime Minister. You might recall that he had a stylist, an image consultant, and psychic who was initially on the public payroll. And then when that became a controversy, she was moved over to the party payroll. This is a woman who would go around and pick out Stephen Harper's suits and apply makeup before television interviews or appearances where he might need makeup, fix his hair, that sort of thing. Why was that, someone's specific job, and why was it being paid for by the party? That it seems a bit odd. Most of us can pick out our own clothes in the morning. So Stephen Harper's incensed at this, and he's still justifying, and so are his supporters, what was done before. It's up to the party. And if one's right, then they're both right. But you can't be holier than thou on this. As for the school fees, I do want to point out, I know the specific Catholic school in Ottawa. You could have, I was surprised when I found out during the campaign that Andrew Scheer did not send his children to the local Catholic school because it's a pretty good one. But he had decided to send them to this private one. Like many religious schools, it's not a highfalutin, high-paying, $20,000 a year per student situation. I've seen some claims of that, which would mean that the Conservative Party could have been paying 20 grand a kid. Well, they weren't. They were paying the difference in the fees between the private Catholic school he sent the kids to in Regina and the private Catholic school he sent the kids to in Ottawa. What that is, I couldn't tell you. I'd be shocked if it's more than $2,000, $3,000 a year. And is that something that you're going to, fire the executive director over? It's not the reason that Scheer left, I'll guarantee you that. But it is the reason they fired their executive director. It's the reason they're having a public fight that makes the whole party look bad. It makes them look like they can't get their own house in order. So if you can't do that, how are you going to govern the country? It's a silly fight for the party to be having in public, but they seem to be enjoying it.
Yeah, somebody needs to, give their head a shake here. Yeah, it looks very, very amateur. Now, Brian, there's going to be a leadership contest coming up, in the not too distant future here. Let me give you a couple of names, and then you give me a quick description of who this person is and their status in this upcoming race.
Ron Ambrose, former cabinet minister under Stephen Harper, former interim leader after Harper stepped down, now living out in Calgary, may not be interested in the leadership. Newly married, she's under pressure, but hasn't said yes. She also hasn't said no yet, so stay tuned.
Yeah, she seems like the early front runner. So Peter MacKay, of course, no commitment there just yet either, but he's long been, I think, looking for such a gig, right?
Former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party when he merged that party with Stephen Harper's Canadian Alliance, deputy leader of sorts for the longest time, senior cabinet minister, originally from Nova Scotia, represented that area for a long time, now making lots of money on Bay Street in Toronto. And he's also in his mid-50s with 3 young kids at home. So is now the right time for him? A lot of this is going to come down to, do people want it? Is it right for where they are at this stage in life?
Right. Aaron O'Toole, he had a good leadership run last time round.
Yeah, he finished 3rd. Aaron O'Toole, he was first elected in, I believe, in the 2011 election, or maybe shortly before that in a by-election. And he was at one point Minister of Veterans Affairs, well respected within the military and the veterans community. He's a veteran himself. He is from the Toronto area. Durham is his riding. It's near Oshawa, the famous GM assembly plant that's now closing. He was said to be, looking at not running if Peter MacKay ran. Now he's in regardless of whether MacKay runs. So they draw from some of the same base of supporters within the party and from party operatives. So we'll see what that means for the future of the race.
For sure. Okay. Pierre Poilievre.
Pierre Poilievre is a longtime MP. He was first elected in 2004. He was one of the 24, 25-year-olds. There was a group of them. Andrew Scheer was another. They were first elected as young bucks, surprise, both of them knocking off giants back in the day. And he was parliamentary secretary and then cabinet minister under Stephen Harper. He's performed very well as the Conservative Party's finance critic, getting under Bill Morneau's skin with some tough questions. He is definitely in at this point. So is O'Toole, by the way.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, they are sharp guys, you know, so that'll be an interesting race for sure. I'm out of time. I wanted to throw some more names by here, but thanks so much, Brian, as always. Your entertaining look at things.
Thank you.
All right, Brian Lilly, one of our regular BCN political contributors. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching today.